Welcome to Interfaces, where we delve into the key terms of cultural heritage conservation. I'm Simona Sayeva, conservation engineer, guiding you through the unique words that shape our understanding of this intricate field. Let's explore and connect through the language of conservation. Authenticity. Now, there is a guiding star in the conservation of cultural heritage. It's a quality, or rather, a value, that directs firstly the knowledge and understanding of cultural heritage, secondly, the decision regarding any potential actions to be planned. What do we mean by authenticity? And how do we recognize it? The answer isn't straightforward, despite the familiarity of the word. As Yuka Yukiletu notes in his article Questions of Authenticity, the word authenticity can have different connotations in different contexts. As mentioned in the 1994 NARA conference, this word of Greek and Latin origin does not necessarily exist in all languages, such as Japanese or Arabic. In cultural heritage conservation, authenticity is a quality rooted in the artisanal and artistic maintenance approach. This approach, framed by philosophical and theoretical foundations, have evolved over decades of debates and experience, leading to internationally shared principle. These principles require constant revisions to keep pace with evolving collective sensitivities and perception. Key milestones help us understand what authenticity means in cultural heritage conservation and why it is important. Two main milestones are the Venice Charter and the NARA document, which extended the concept of acknowledging the essential role of cultural heritage in almost all nations, and the need to adhere to a concept of authenticity respectful of the cultural and social values of all countries. In the Venice Charter, authenticity is an essential concept linked to the sources on which restoration is based. The aim is to preserve and reveal the formal and historical values of the monument, based on respect for ancient substance and authentic documentation, as said in the Article 9 of the Charter. The NARA document on authenticity, conceived in the spirit of the Venice Charter, extends this concept. UNESCO's glossary definition also derives from the NARA document. Authenticity only applies to cultural properties and to the cultural aspect of mixed properties. Authenticity can be seen as the link between attributes and the outstanding universal value. According to paragraph 8.2 of the operational guidelines, always UNESCO, a World Heritage Property may be understood to meet the condition of authenticity if their cultural values are truthfully and credibly expressed through a variety of attributes. These attributes include form and design, material and substance, use and function, tradition, techniques and management systems, location and settings, language and other form of intangible heritage, spirit and feeling, and other internal and external factors. In simpler terms, we can say that cultural heritage meets the condition of authenticity if its cultural values are truthfully and believably expressed through different features, such as its design, material, location, and other characteristics. Additionally, we could say that authenticity as a value also serves to prevent any possible ideological bias, whether in historical interpretation or material intervention. In practice, authenticity is the value that, once identified, must be adhered to in order to respect all the other values that the cultural heritage embodies and represents. This involves maintaining historical alignment between documentary sources and material characteristics. Have you noticed something? Often, when discussing authenticity, we refer to architecture, monuments, and sites, large scale objects, or collections of objects. But what about movable cultural heritage, the medium sized and small objects? In general, in a non specialist framework, when referring to a cultural heritage object, authenticity is often understood differently. It frequently pertains to the notion that the work, in whole or in part, is original and can be unquestionably attributed to a specific artist, craftsmanship, or author. Let's look at an example together now. Imagine a painting on canvas, perhaps inherited or bought from an antique dealer or a flea market, with the painter's signature. As owners, we are interested in knowing if the painting is authentic. In this case, authentic means that the canvas was truly created by the person who signed it, and that all the information is consistent, including from a temporal perspective. First, we want to know more about the author, when they practiced, whether they were an amateur or a professional, whether they were ever valued or exhibited. For these, both documentary sources such as purchase documents, certificates, correspondence, catalogs if they exist, and the painting itself in all its parts, meaning painting, canvas, and frame, must be examined. This is an interdisciplinary work, often dependent on the available budget for verification. The professional best suited for this initial role is undoubtedly the conservator, who can provide an overall analysis and guide further historical and scientific investigations. The conservator will analyze each part to identify the original creation and distinguish it from any subsequent modifications. Also, determining if the signature is original or, unfortunately, added later. At this point, if all the gathered information is consistent, it can reasonably be said that the painting is authentic. Here, the definition of authenticity diverges depending on the scale of the cultural heritage object. If the painting was a building, based on the analysis result, it could be said to be authentic. Each phase, from the original to subsequent modifications, is consistent with the well documented and recognized history of the artifact. In other words, the materiality, appearance, and history are coherent, regardless of how many times it has been modified. However, in the case of the painting, each subsequent modification, distinct from the original, even if documented, is usually perceived as non authentic. For example, if, following damage, past owners had the painting repainted by an artist to repair the damaged parts, or if the original painting is intact, but the conservator's analysis reveals that some details were added later, perhaps to make it more interesting. Think of a coat of arms or similar. This happens because for movable cultural and historical heritage, authenticity is often confused with something else, autography, where the creator or manufacturer is unique. Orthography, however, deals with the originality phase by phase, which is not authenticity as understood in cultural heritage conservation. Now, let's look at architecture, buildings in general, as well as monumental and archaeological sites. These are large scale, immovable objects that have accumulated layers over time. These aspects are precisely why authenticity in architecture is considered differently than for other cultural heritage objects and the arts in general. An architectural work does not result from the direct execution of the designer, architect, artist, or engineer, as buildings are the product of collective creation and undergo transformations over time that are part of their history. The conservation of these cultural heritage buildings is, therefore, based on respecting the ancient substance and preserving the documentary value that is contained within it. Once the quality of the object is recognized, treatments should aim to preserve the authenticity of the materials that constitute the various elements from different eras. To testify to the process of transformation the heritage has undergone over time. Furthermore, the approach has become increasingly conservative, with more attention to material aspects, becoming more archaeological. This archaeological approach has profoundly influenced architectural conservation. In particular, in the last decades of the 20th century, interdisciplinary debates pushed conservation toward a more conservative and authentic vision, benefiting from techniques like stratigraphic reading to reveal the history of buildings through their materiality. The importance of technical knowledge of physical materiality and craftsmanship practices is essential for preserving authenticity. Considering each element as bearer of historical evidence. So, is authenticity different depending on the type of objects or its scale? Are you a bit confused? That's normal. In the world of cultural heritage conservation, for movable cultural heritage, the fact that they can result from collective works over time without compromising their authenticity remains somewhat controversial and, even when accepted, is subject to various interpretations. For architecture or entire sites, however, the concept of authenticity is more naturally integrated. A building is intuitively the result of collective creation. It's impossible for one person to construct from the foundation to the roof, including decorations. Impossible. Just as it is impossible, or at least highly unlikely, that a building that has come down to us through centuries has done so without being modified, adapted, renovated, or even partially damaged and rebuilt. This is intuitive. The foundation of authenticity for objects, whether movable or immovable, regardless of their scale, is the relationship with the cultural context, phase by phase, from creation to all subsequent modifications, whether intentional or accidental. The verification of authenticity is based on the historical coherence between documentary sources and the characterization of the object's materiality at each stage of its stratification. The creation, interpretation, and preservation of artifacts are deeply intertwined with their materiality across all culture and times. Modern reflections challenge the fixed nature of matter, revealing it as a dynamic and transformative. Materiality, encompassing properties like texture, weight, and spatial presence, relates to how artifacts interact with their evolving environments and cultural contexts. This theme underscored the importance of interdisciplinary dialogue in understanding these processes. This encapsulates the core theme of the 36 CIHA, Comité International d'Histoire de l'Art World Congress, that took place last June in Lyon. The Congress aimed to explore the dynamic and transformative nature of materiality in art and artifact, fostering interdisciplinarity and intercultural dialogue on how these processes and perception evolve across different contexts and methodologies. The theme of the Congress marks an evolution in the debate about key concepts underlying the idea of authenticity. It reflects a shift from traditional views of materiality as fixed and unchanging to a more dynamic understanding of matter as inherently transformative. What are the aspects in which we seek authenticity? For a movable object, like a painting, a piece of pottery, a book, etc., authenticity is often sought in historical, aesthetical, and material aspects, with a bias toward apparent characteristics of surface, form, and matter. This applies whether we refer to decoration or the architectural heritage as a whole. In everyday practice, the search for and debate about authenticity primarily involve documentary studies and scientific analysis of the artifact. This process aims to clearly attribute each part to a specific historical interval, distinguishing and classifying ambiguous elements, including potential historical forgeries or simple imitative additions. The application of this meticulous work translates into intervention choices that aim to make the historical material certifications readable while respecting them, providing solutions that are both conservative and perceptive. The flip side of this coin is the suspicion that preserving an object equates to preserving a particular aspect of it, whether in terms of composition or material. Is there a common factor that unites movable and immovable objects? A common denominator that transcends scales? Well, we have seen that authenticity relates to matter, materiality, and their relationship to documentary sources and the cultural context of the object. Thus, assessing authenticity is an acknowledgement of the real constitution, often historically layered, of a cultural heritage object. However, there is an aspect that constitutes a common denominator for all objects, regardless of their scale, that also serves as an element of authenticity and is often overlooked: the functionality of the object. This refers to how all the constituent parts, regardless of their stratification, maintain their balance concerning the material and immaterial context in which they are found. Structural functioning. The structure, or rather the structural functioning, unites everything. Yet, it is so overlooked as a factor of authenticity that it is considered acceptable to alter it with external interventions, as long as the principle of balance is maintained. As I develop in my book Conservazione delle decorazioni architettoniche, il ruolo delle strutture di supporto, this principle is quite original in its approach. When we re examine the process of researching authenticity through the lens of functioning, it becomes immediately clear that the authenticity of a structural behavior is not currently considered, or is subordinated to aspects of appearance. Structural functioning is also an element of authenticity, and as such, it must be understood, respected, and preserved. Considering the mechanical functioning of a building as an essential factor of authenticity paves the way for a more organic conservation, linking form and structure naturally. It is also more sustainable as it requires respecting construction techniques, resistance characteristics, and compatibility found mainly in traditional materials and methods. To be clear, this is not an invitation to reject decades of progress. Rather, it is a call to start with the original, including the structure and the structural behavior, which must be thoroughly understood before any treatment. Medical comparisons fit well in the field of conservation. Consider a patient with a bone injury. Depending on the type of injury, age, and health, the specialist may propose a temporary brace or a more invasive intervention, such as a permanent metal plate. Both solutions aim to restore motor function while respecting the patient's physiognomy and, we may say, overall authenticity. Similarly, a building is like a patient, an organism to be studied before any intervention to solve a problem. Choosing between a brace or a metal plate is akin to considering a structural behavior as a factor of authenticity. Neglecting, or worse, denying the structural behavior's contribution to authenticity can lead to interventions that, in the given example, resemble embalming rather than curing. Referring to the building as an architectural organism, a term used in some fields, facilitates the perception of structural and mechanical behavior. In mechanics, we refer to bodies, and in conservation, many terms are borrowed from medical scientific disciplines that deal with organisms. Think of diagnostics, anamnesis, and how we refer to degradation as pathologies. As we discussed in the previous episode dedicated to the word pathology, understanding this aspect is crucial. Conclusions. When it comes to cultural heritage, it is easy to confuse authenticity and originality as values and qualities. Originality refers to the unequivocal traceability to a specific historical phase, a particular production, and a defined context, often focusing on the author. Authenticity, on the other hand, is a quality related to the object and its context as a whole, regardless of the number of phases it comprises and layers. Authenticity plays a crucial role in scientific studies and conservation treatments. Recognizing the value judgments regarding heritage may differ from culture to culture. It is emphasized that value judgments and authenticity judgments must not be based on a uniform criteria. The word authenticity can have different connotations in different contexts. As noted in the 1994 NARA conference document, this word of Greek and Latin origin does not necessarily exist in all languages, such as Japanese or Arabic. The NARA document concludes the judgment of authenticity, depending on the nature of the monument or site and its cultural context, is linked to a variety of information sources. This judgment must address both the material of which the monument document is composed and the significance it holds within the social cultural profile of each country, regardless of its scale. This is the core of today's podcast episode. Movable objects, monuments, and sites all share one critical factor: functionality as key element of authenticity. Understanding functionality presupposes knowledge of the constitution over time. This means knowing the modification in a relative manner rather than absolute. One of the significant challenges posed by terms like authenticity is starting from part or element to understand how the whole functions together in its context. This is the key to conserving and interacting with the object, to ensure it lasts over time, whether through direct intervention or indirect, more preventive measures. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you found this episode insightful. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll dive deeper into the fascinating world of cultural heritage conservation. Until next time, take care. And remember, preserving authenticity is not just about keeping the old, but understanding its true story and context connections. As we wrap up this episode of my podcast Interfaces, I wanted to thank you for joining me on this exploration of cultural heritage conservation through words. I'd like to extend my gratitude to the amazing team behind this podcast. Media, Salvatore Melluso, for expertly crafting our audio experience. Graphic design, Emanuela Nosari, for creating our striking visuals. Language, Tanya Yakovenko, for ensuring our message resonates clearly. If you enjoyed our discussion and are interested in delving deeper into these topics, especially for my Italian listener, be sure to check out my books: Conservazione delle decorazioni architettoniche, Il ruolo delle strutture di supporto, published in 2022, and my latest release, Pitture murali, I degradi di origine meccanica, metodologia per restauratori e ingegneri. You can find links to these books and all the references mentioned in this episode in the show notes. Don't forget to check them out. Stay tuned and make sure to follow my podcast on Spotify by hitting the follow button to receive updates on the latest episodes. You can also show support by rating the podcast with stars. This helps more listeners discover the podcast. Thank you for your attention today, and I look forward to having you join us in the next episode of Interfaces, the podcast.